You're very welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of the Mobiography Awards live show. With me is Andy Butler.
Hello.
And not with us this week is Brendan O'Shea, but we'll explain where Brendan is in a short little while. If you're joining us for the very, very first time, then hello, and you're very welcome. And thanks for joining us for what hopefully will be around an hour to an hour and 15 minutes of a live show today. Remember, it is live, so you can interact, you can ask questions, you can throw ideas at us. Please do interact. If you're on YouTube, just use the comment panel and we'll have access to all your comments here within StreamYard. So I'm going to throw to Andy to do a quick introduction, talk a little bit about himself, and to explain where Brendan is. Andy.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Andy. I'm the founder and editor of Mobiography magazine. I've been shooting pictures with my smartphone since I think it was 2012, and yeah, it's always been the camera that's sort of in my pocket and always available there. Started the magazine, and that's evolved to where we are now. Brendan, unfortunately, he's away on business at the moment. And due to time zone issues, he can't be with us today. So I'm afraid we're going to have to do without his chiseled good looks and firm jutting chin. I'm afraid it's just me and Glenn.
There's a quote card in that one that I'm definitely sharing on social afterwards. But anyway, we'll miss him, but I'm sure we'll manage. But anyway, so if you're new to the Mobiography Awards and if you've never heard about the awards or anything before, it's probably worth saying, like I say, this is season 2. So last year, myself, Andy, and Brendan launched the Mobiography Awards as a spin-off from the Mobiography magazine. We learned a hell of a lot, particularly off the live shows. The idea of the live shows is to be able to give something back to the community, so that not only is it a competition where you submit your work and hope for the best, but actually so that you can hopefully learn and get some takeaways and get some ideas, and also realize above all else that there is in fact a community out there. If you're not already a member of the photographic community, all built around smartphones, then you really should chip in, join in, and try and get involved in some way. The Mobiography page on Facebook is a really, really good starting point. So with all that in mind, and as we're here about the second season of the awards, there's a few things that are a little bit different from last year. One of those being the categories, the second being prizes, and the third being the way that we're actually approaching the kind of sponsors / giveaways this year. So first of all, to kick off, we have different categories. Andy, I'm going to bang these up on screen. Do you want to talk us through this year's?
Yeah, we've got 8 categories this year. I think last year we had 4 photographic categories and a video category. This year we've just got 8 photographic categories. So the first one is abstract and digital art. So that can be anything sort of abstract or created with sort of mobile app artwork type apps. We've got architecture and the urban environment, black and white, which is fairly self-explanatory, family and home, landscape and nature, people and portrait, street photography, and travel and a sense of place.
So 4 new categories, many of them in response, I would think, to feedback that we got from people that entered the competition last year, who felt that they would like kind of slightly more nuanced or specific kind of genres. Also, we have changed up effectively the prize structure this year. So the prizes are grand prize now of $1,500. The submission system that we use basically is all in dollars. So you might wonder why it's not in euros or pounds, but that's the main reason. And then each of the category winners will potentially walk away with $250. But in addition to that, we basically have got sponsorship from 3 different companies. So Joby, Reflex, and Cozy Speed, each of which have given us actual giveaway prizes. And on today's show, we'll be giving away the very, very first set of prizes, which is from Reflex, which is, remind me again, Andy, it's a voucher, isn't it? So you can basically
it's a voucher code. So there is $199 worth of Reflex products. So Reflex produce lenses, add-on lenses. There's a case. The lenses screw into the case. I've got some samples here. They are, I don't know if you can see that, they are aluminium sort of build, good quality glass. Some of the lenses have a little screw-on lens hood. So you've got $199 worth of products there. I believe it's not applicable to bundle packs that they do. So you could buy a case, a landscape, wide-angle lens, a macro lens, or they do telephoto, anamorphic. There's quite a selection there, and I believe they now producing filters.
Interesting. Know that.
So there's quite a good. I've been using them for a while, and they're very good. I really like them.
Okay, awesome. So nice that you get a voucher and you can basically choose what you want of it rather than just getting a specific product. So it's up to you to decide what you want out of it if you win it. Now, speaking of winning it, we will do that as a random draw at the end of today's show. So if you have submitted your photographs already, then by default, you're into the actual giveaway draw. And like I say, we will draw a winner at the end of the show. So we've touched on the changes to the categories. We've talked a little bit about the different prizes that we have. There's one other change, obviously, this year is that we have a selection of judges, including some familiar faces and also some new faces. Andy, do you want to talk us through who we have?
Yep. We've got Joanne Carter. Now, she's a professional journalist and photographer and the founder and editor of the website, The App Whisperer, which a lot of people will have heard of. It's one of the original sites, I think, from the mobile photography and mobile art movement. We have Joanne Bradford, who is a professional photographer and author of the best-selling book, Smartphone, Smart Photography and Smartphone, Smart Editing. They're available on Amazon. We've got award-winning travel photographer and writer Jem Pollock Bianco. Benjamin Fu, who is the co-founder of Monogram Asia. Tanya Kiang, she is the director of the Gallery of Photography in Dublin, and Elaine Taylor, who joined us on the last live show, and she is an iPhone photographer from Yorkshire, and I believe she's in her 6th year of doing a 365 photographic project. So yeah, she's been taking a photo every day for the past 6 years, posting those out on Instagram. And finally, yeah, we've got Dan Rubin as well. He's a designer and photographer from the US.
Not just a designer and photographer, but someone who's actually joining us on the show shortly, and we'll be doing a deep dive on Dan's photographic journey. Now, a tiny bit of backstory, I suppose. I met Dan for the very, very first time back in 2015, I'm pretty sure, when he and Andy and Brendan were some of the first speakers to take to the stage, basically at the very, very first MojoCon, the first conference that I organized way back in 2015. I have to say, I've had the pleasure of meeting him on multiple times, usually on trips to London, though he is a bit of a traveling nomad and can be seen popping up in different places on the planet. If you do follow him on Instagram, you'll see that you could literally find him anywhere in the globe on any given day. He's got a life that looks like it really is living the dream, but we'll deep dive and find out the truth behind all that shortly. But Dan is standing by back over there. There he is, sipping his coffee and looking as chilled as ever. We'll be with you in a second, Dan. We'll be with you in 1 second.
I'm feeling a bit out of sorts here.
Yeah.
Odd one out.
Before we dive in, I just want to say to anyone watching us, all of you on YouTube at the moment, if you have questions for Dan, if you have comments that you want to share, thanks to all of those who've already chipped in and let us know where in the world you're joining us. But again, please do make this interactive. I'll be keeping an eye on the thread on YouTube, and Andy will also. So by all means, fire any questions you might have as we go. But anyway, look, pleasure as always to meet this man. I have to say, even though we're going for competition, who's got the best beard? I don't know. I think he wins.
It's not I guess we need another panel of judges now for something different.
Beard, yeah, that'd be a good start. All right,
yeah. How are you two doing? I'm at the minute. I'm in my hometown of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where I grew up. I've got a couple more weeks here until I fly back to the UK. So just visiting family for a bit.
Very good. And do you mind me asking, because it's a theme, obviously, over the duration of Mobiography Awards, we've moved from phases of lockdown to reopening to lockdown to reopening and everything. How has the 2 and a bit years of chaos that was COVID-19, I know it's not gone, so I don't want to be, dismissive in any way, but certainly there's a level of normality returning. Is it the same for you? Have you had a very interesting 2 years?
It's been a very interesting 2 years. Things are slowly returning to something that akin to what they were before, but emphasis on slowly. And it's this interesting pace where things speed up really quickly, and then stuff might get canceled over. You know, it was like that at the end of last year, and I'm expecting that this winter might be the same. And of course, it depends on where you are. Every country's dealing with things differently. In the States, where I actually got stuck in Florida because of all the travel restrictions, I was here for 2 weeks. That 2 weeks turned into 18 months. So
wow.
that alone was interesting. And as a travel related photographer and speaker, obviously a lot of that stuff, the photography side disappeared for a while, and all of the teaching turned virtual, like it did for everyone. But you know, everyone stayed healthy, and I have a hard time sitting on my hands and doing nothing. So it didn't take me long to start making some new companies and creating new side projects that turned into new work things. So you know, whoever said "May you live in interesting times," we just have to. That was basically a curse on all of us.
Yeah. Be careful what you ask for, isn't everything? Or be careful what you wish for. That's it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Dan, take us back to the beginning of the journey for you. Like, I know that in your 10-minute slot in the first ever MojoCon, we only got not even a glimpse. Like, it was like a flash frame of the backstory. But I'm interested. We have a bit of time today for a change. So,
gosh,
can you take me back to where it all began? I mean, we don't need to go back to when the parents conceived now or anything. Let's
I forgot. I'm. It's a good thing I removed the baby picture from my slide deck, because I went all the way back. No, well, I do. That's not even a joke. Sometimes when I'm talking about my photographic journey and I'm leaning into this one aspect of it, there's actually a Polaroid of me in the hospital, because that's what they used to do when you're a certain age. You know, before digital, they would just snap a Polaroid, and that's what they give to the parents, and I guess they probably staple it to the birth certificate or something like that. And I always kind of start with that, because I tend to start by talking about Polaroids, because my start photographically came really, really late compared to a lot of people. I mean, everyone starts when they discover it, and there's no too late. But just age-wise, I've been a designer and a creative pretty much my whole life. But I was a painter in my early teens, and thought I would be a painter and a fine artist, and then discovered design and graphic design, and that kind of merged, you know, the artistic side with the more practical side of what I was into and interested in. And so I've just been working with rectangles basically in creative ways for a very long time. And for some reason, the camera never connected with me, or I never connected with it. And I think it is a bit of a two-way street there. I think it's not just about seeing photography as a medium that might work for you, because how are you to understand that until the camera has shown you it, right? That's the problem with a lot of creative outlets, is that until you've tried it, you look at what other people create, and a lot of us will think, oh, I could never do that. Or you look at something and you admire it, and you don't even think that it's something you could do. That thought just doesn't cross your mind. You're just happy to see something pretty and beautiful. And then if you try it, you kind of go, oh, this is for me. I'd like to do more of this. Or you go, no, it's not for me. Just like a sport, just like any hobby, any interest. And so for whatever reason, the right combination of timing and camera and experience hadn't connected with me. So it wasn't until I was nearly 30, which as a professional creative and creator still feels to me like it was very, very late, that I connected with photography. And we can put up a slide here, because it shows why I connected. And my background's design. So what actually happened was almost nothing to do with photography. It was all to do with product design. I saw this is a Polaroid Sx70. It was actually the first model of Polaroid camera that used what is now the iconic film with the white borders. This came out in 1972. There were already other Polaroid cameras before that, but this was the first one that was an integral camera, meaning that you didn't have to peel things apart or use rollers or anything. It just came out of the camera, and a few minutes later you had an image. And I'd never seen this camera before, and a few friends of mine who were designers had been using it and shooting Polaroid film, and Polaroid announced they were discontinuing their film. And this all kind of, I discovered that and saw images of this camera all at the same time. And the product designer in me kind of had a little bit of FOMO. And that's honestly what got me into it, because I thought, oh, this is a beautiful thing. Because what you can kind of tell from this picture for everyone watching, but it folds, and it folds down. It collapses into something that looks a little bit like a cigar case. Mm-hmm. And then it's a transformer. It's a perfect thing. It's like this toy that isn't a toy, and it is still one of my favorite product designs. And I thought, you know what, I should buy one of these to put on the shelf, and while the film still exists, I'll run a few packs through so I can tell my grandkids that I shot it one day. And those 2 packs of film, those 20 images, completely changed my life. And that's why I say it wasn't just that I hadn't discovered photography, it's that the right camera hadn't spoken to me and the right process hadn't spoken to me. And I think anyone who's discovered photography through smartphones understands what that feels like too, is that you need the gateway, you need that entry point. And this was that for me. I'll actually just show a couple of things. Like these are some of my earliest images from the first couple of years, and you know, it feels, now you can see, well, this is very reminiscent of Instagram. And of course, a lot of Instagram's original filters were based on things like Polaroids, and, you know, shifting the colors and the contrast a little bit and making things interesting. And maybe there's a bit of a vignette here and there, but there's a parallel that I'll get to in a minute. But shooting these images, and these are kind of later ones because I've never not had a Polaroid camera since then. There's something just wonderful about it. It's a very simple process, and it's mostly about framing, seeing and framing and focusing. And with that old camera especially, it's just manual focus. You have no aperture control. You've got there's an analog in the process to shooting with a smartphone, where you don't generally have many controls unless you want to get a third-party shooting app or anything else. So that was my experience that got me into photography, and it changed my life in such a big way, because as a designer, I had this thing in my hand that I thought I would just shoot a little bit because I didn't think I was a photographer. I had photographers as, you know, my second girlfriend was an incredibly talented photographer, shooting all on film in, like, you know, our late teens. And then I had other friends as designer. I had friends who were photographers who were amazing, and I just never thought that would be something I could do. And suddenly here was this camera that was creating beautiful things while I was holding it. And as a designer, I had to unpack that. I had to go, what is different about this camera from any other camera that I've had? Because have I really changed that much in a split second? I can't have done that. The product has led me to something that I didn't know I was capable of, or that I could connect with. And the next kind of 3, 4, 5 years, really, I was a hobbyist photographer, but I was buying loads of cameras, film and digital. And I was doing my own personal research as I was still doing, you know, professionally design and traveling and speaking at conferences. And we can take these away if you want. What I was doing was becoming a travel photographer and kind of documenting cities that I was going to while speaking at design conferences and traveling for music and other things that had nothing to do with photography. But having that camera in my hand was building this relationship between what I saw when I was somewhere new and how I was relating to it. And the way I was relating to it was through photography. I almost never took pictures in my hometown. It was always the thing that would happen when I was away somewhere. And so over the course of those few years, something else came about, which was the introduction to Instagram. And before that, for about a year and a half, we had the iPhone for 3 years leading up to when Instagram came around. And the original iPhone, if anyone remembers who's watching this, it was basically a potato for a camera. It wasn't very good, right? It had a camera, but it wasn't anything that any of us wanted to use. And I would play around with it, but wasn't, you know, overwhelmed by it. And then I remember the iPhone 4 coming out and feeling a shift. And this is before Instagram, but I was playing around with apps. I was always beta testing apps anyway as a designer, but I was always trialing apps as well. I wanted to see what people were doing with this little rectangle in all its forms. And that included photography at that point, because I've now been shooting digital and film in loads of different ways for a couple of years. And I was obsessed with, like, what each different shape and design of a camera would lead to. So what happened was, and we can actually go back to the slides very quickly. So there was this inflection point where the iPhone 4S came out. And that for me is still one of my favorite smartphone cameras. There was just something a little better about the lens. It had this really wonderful kind of X-shaped flare that would happen if you were pointing directly at a light source, including the sun. It just had this really wonderful fall off. It didn't have that little green dot that follows us around everywhere now on newer smartphones. And its rendering was beautiful. I actually have some photos that I'll show and we'll talk about later that were shot on the 4S because they still hold up. I mean, it was a really impressive jump in the technology there. And the 4S came out the same year Instagram kind of really became a thing. So in that kind of range, Instagram was the original logo and icon for Instagram. It's a Polaroid camera. And the way I discovered it, a friend of mine, Patrick Haney, was a designer at the time at Harvard. And he tweeted out something with this icon saying something about that he was playing with something pretty cool. And this is maybe 3 months before Instagram launched. So probably 12 years ago, exactly, right about now, because Instagram launched in October. And he tweets this thing out, and I see it as a Polaroid, and I just reply to him and say, I don't know what it is, but I need to check this out, obviously, because, and everyone in my design circles and people I spoke at conferences with all knew that I loved Polaroids. I always had them with me. And they also knew that I was the guy who the designers at those events would ask for with camera questions. So he, being one of only a couple of dozen beta testers on what was Instagram at that point, he emailed the two co-founders and said, oh, you really need to get Dan on the beta because not only will he give you good design feedback, but he's a good photographer too. And so then I got invited. I was one of the first probably 30 or 40 people on Instagram. And it's this weird connection between, would that have happened if the icon wasn't ripping off Polaroid at the time? And I mean, they were definitely ripping it off. That was not done with permission, and it changed really quickly, right? I'm sure there was a nice cease and desist letter that exists somewhere, framed, I hope. But so what the final connection here to explain with Polaroid for me, that gateway into photography being this camera that was designed in such a way, and the film, that made me suddenly think of myself as a photographer where other cameras I'd used hadn't. This is the very first picture actually that I took on Instagram on the beta with the iPhone 4. This is just at the beach in Fort Lauderdale. And I still have it. I still leave it on the account. This is, taken and shot and posted 2.5, 3 months before Instagram launched. And back at that time, and for the first, I don't know, almost the first year of Instagram, you could only publish something when you shot it. You couldn't pull something from your camera roll. You had to take the picture in the app, choose a filter, and publish it or throw it away. And there was something really pure but also familiar to me about that process because it felt like shooting a Polaroid. You just had to, you took the picture, you picked something, and then that was it. It was the simplicity of that meant that the decision process was very binary. It's like, do I like this or not? If yes, pick a filter and then publish, because you can't do anything other than publish it. You couldn't even save it. It wouldn't save to your camera roll until you hit publish and share. And it immediately, it reminded me of shooting with the Polaroid, and I instantly knew that this was going to be something that was going to do the same thing for a lot of people that the Polaroid did for me. And I became kind of one of the very earliest #1 fans of it, and was just telling, when it launched, I was telling anyone who would listen that they needed to get on this, because it was even more simple than shooting a Polaroid, right? Because at that time, you would have had to go and find a Polaroid camera, hope that it worked, and buy expensive film. And obviously, downloading a free app is a whole lot easier. So there's this wonderful comparison for me about the experience of taking pictures being what trumps what you're taking a picture with. And I think it's one of the secrets behind the success of smartphones. Now, now smartphones have become so technologically advanced that the image quality is amazing. And we can look at this, and the iPhone 4 wasn't great, it wasn't stellar, and then you slap a really heavy duty filter on top of it, and then you also reduce the resolution, because those original Instagram images were really tiny, so you're not even getting the whatever 8 megapixels the phone was capable of. But that wasn't the point, right? The point was the experience and the end result and being happy with it. And you complete that loop, and someone's going to do it again and do it again and do it again. And that's what happened with Polaroid's film for me originally, and then with Instagram. And as the cameras became better, I mean, this is an image that I still point back to, shot on the 5S in 2014. And it's, you can kind of tell if you've been shooting enough, you can tell that it would have been shot with an HDR mode turned on. And I also gave it an edit at the time, but this was something that was just like a simple click and a slight crop probably, but nothing else, other than, some sort of Vsco filter at the time it would have been. And even then, that's something that you couldn't have done as easily with any DSLR. It would have required so much extra work. So there's this also interesting parallel that as the technology has continued to improve in the hardware, the experience of using the smartphones has actually gotten closer to the experience of that original Instagram, where there's less and less and less for you to do. The smart HDR that we have now on iOS and all of the similar technologies that exist in Android as well. The goal is that someone who has no experience and no knowledge of how photography and light works should be able to point their camera at something and take a picture and it looks okay, or it looks good, better than okay, right? And that's all of these image processing pipelines and all this computational photography is trying to do that. It's trying to cheat physics of using a sensor that's the size of a grain of sand and a very refined but still plastic lens with all these tiny little elements. That's not a good optical starting point for image quality, but it doesn't matter because the devices themselves are supercomputers, and it's why they've leapt ahead, because they weren't even back with the 5S. The resolution and total image quality wasn't where DSLRs were, and we're still not really there. But for most people, it's much easier because no one wants to do post-production and people don't know how to edit. And like, people would rather play with their thumbs and edit and then download images from an SD card to their big computer. And it's just really, for me as a designer, I love it because it's a constant reminder and an example that I could use to clients too as a designer, to that simplicity for the user, the end user, will trump anything else.
Mm-hmm. It raises a really interesting question as well, though, doesn't it? Because I mean, you've trained multiple people over the years, and I mean, it's an element in the courses that I do, obviously, which are more video centric, but compositional elements of photography are a core part of the course, and that simplification of the entire process is the thing that you will often see trigger the eureka moment in someone who, as you said, back pre-Polaroid, never kind of felt that you would identify with the word "I'm a photographer." You can see that moment lighten up in people's faces. It's like you give them a few tips in composition, they apply it to the simple process of taking an image, and suddenly they literally like, holy, you know what I mean? They're looking at the image going, oh my God, this is incredible,
And you see that with everything. I mean, again, it's because really what's the main tools that a photographer has are our eyes and the gray matter that exists here, and also even our ears, and we are the main tool. And it's so easy to get caught up, regardless of what kind of photography you do. I do analog film photography, I do digital, and I do smartphone, which is still digital, but whatever. I shoot with anything. I don't care about the tool as long as the tool allows me to achieve my end result. And I'm the same as a designer. Like I'm not loyal to a particular tool unless it does the job I want it to do. But if there's another tool, I'll also use that too. And I'm constantly experimenting. It's just like pen and pencil. Like, why should anyone choose between the two of them? It's ludicrous. They're two different things that you use in a very similar way, but they achieve a very different end result depending on the use and the implementation. And for me, cameras are the same. They should be an extension of the photographer. So the thing that we have to train is ourselves, but that's also why we need that trigger. We need that connection with the tool first to make us want to use it more, to make us want to experiment, because we are the main tool at use. And I've seen people, I mean, I've experienced this myself. I had cameras. My dad was an amateur photographer. He was a hobbyist photographer. He had a couple of loads of different Nikon film cameras and then Nikon digital cameras. I had them around. I never cared to use them. They didn't. Now some of them inspire me, but for whatever reason at the time, I would have taken pictures and not connected that loop, not completed that loop, even with early digital. And I've been able to test myself and other people enough since, and that I can reverse engineer a lot of the why, but there's still that little bit of an intangible. And I always encourage people to try different cameras before they buy like borrow from friends. But again, it's why smartphones are such a great gateway, because they are all the same. They're boring product design wise as a physical object, because they're just all rectangles with a screen. So they're kind of less interesting that way, but that means that they're also a level playing field. So if you want a smartphone, well, buy a smartphone. It's probably going to have a good camera, and that's your starting point. And it doesn't matter if it's iOS or Android, or it almost doesn't matter if it's high end or low end at this point, because everything has become so good.
Mm-hmm.
The point is getting it and then running around and clicking on and seeing what the end result is. And but with film cameras and digital cameras, bigger digital cameras, you've got to hold it in your hand. You've got to say, do I like holding this? Do I think it's cool? I mean, Fujifilm has won over hearts and minds because they've made cameras that have a slightly retro feel, which has nothing to do with how they take pictures, but it has everything to do with how a photographer connects with the camera, and whether they love it or not, and always want to pick it up and take it out with them. And that's such a missing link in the discussion about people falling in love with photography, is that it has to be easy for them to fall in love with it. Otherwise they won't.
Can I ask you, you made one really interesting comment there. I mean, made lots of really interesting comments, but one particular.
I'm leaving. Where's the exit button on?
How you switch between the kind of the modes between analog and digital, and not differentiating smartphone from digital, but basically that you'll happily pivot between, and the device basically at the end of the day, it's what the end result is going to be that drives your motivation. And yet, in an awful lot of the kind of purist community that I see, we have people who kind of vilify smartphone photographers because they're all about retro film. I actually want the tangible film. I want to go into the darkroom and create this piece of imagery myself. I know, having followed you throughout lockdown and everything else as well, that like you had a really interesting time experimenting in the kind of what I can only define as the hybrid space between the two. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. So everyone on the planet seems to have baked sourdough or learned a language or done something else like that. Read a lot of books. I a few weeks into being stuck, because again, I was stuck in Florida. I literally, my flight got canceled back to London 6 hours before it was supposed to leave from a 2-week visit. So, and I, a few weeks in, I'm like, all right, well, everything has been canceled in the near term. And I'm just going to be here until things get better. What should I do with my time while I'm waiting? And because I've traveled so much, I've just never really felt like I had time to spend time developing my own film and in the darkroom. And because I want to understand, I always want to understand every aspect of something that I do. With digital, that's post-production, and I dive really deeply into it, but I also try to understand what the sensors are doing and what different RAW processors are doing if I'm shooting RAW. So on the film side, it was always a thing I wanted to spend time doing. And so I dove into chemistry, and first black and white developing and processing, and then very quickly color C41 and E6 slide film, because once I figured it out, it was a matter of, I know a lot of people who will only do one and they're too scared to do the others. I'm like, no. Like, I know I'm going to mess up at some point, but I need to understand this, not because I think I'll do a lot of it, but because then that will allow me to have better conversations with my labs and with other photographers, allow me to teach better, or allow me to ask or answer more questions that people always ask me, but I sometimes have to refer to someone else. And again, this, for me, the deeper connection with the process is something that allows me to pull more out of it. So understanding light more in general helps regardless of what tool I'm using. With darkroom work, and then because I was developing, and then I also started printing as well. And I've been doing, even yesterday, I was in a local color darkroom here in South Florida for about 7 hours, doing some test prints and getting a couple of images printed out. And there's also a really interesting connection to digital in here in the darkroom space, because you can print to film if you find a lab that has the right equipment. They're rare now, but that's one of the next things I'm going to be doing, is printing some smartphone pictures, which are 8 to 12 megapixel in range. I'm going to be printing some of them, including some that I'll talk specifically about when I show them in a minute here. But I'm going to be printing them to film, because one of the big questions and issues rather that professional photographers have always had with smartphones is the resolution. right? Which as a print designer, again, talking about understanding as much as you can about everything, not just capture, but output. I've been a print designer. I understand resolution and output resolution and different print methods really well because I've been doing it for 30 years. As a designer, that really helped because a lot of designers don't understand resolution, how it translates from screen to print. And because I've also spent 15 plus years of my career working in design for screens, I understand screen design and output very well, and color management or lack thereof. And that's all of those things have always helped. So if something's being displayed on screen as the destination, I have a deeper understanding of what I can and can't do with the edit to make sure it'll look as best as it can on as many different types of screens. If I'm printing something digitally, whether it's a book or a poster, or if it's a design, or if it's a photograph, or it's on an inkjet printer, I understand how all those technologies work, and it allows me to create a better end result because I understand all of those parts. And once I found out that there was this printer that could print from digital to film, suddenly that unlocked one of the little things that I know. I know that resolution is important, but only to an extent, right? If you have a 12 megapixel file, for everyone who's listening here, and especially for anyone who maybe thinks that it's too low resolution to do things with, if you were printing at 300 DPI in a magazine, you could print a 2-page full bleed, which means the image goes right to the edges, 2-page full bleed spread at 12 megapixel. I mean, you are right at 12 megapixel there. You can't crop it, you can't resize very well, but that will print sharp.
Wow.
Like the pixels just kind of fit and fill that. Because print is actually fairly low resolution compared to what we are told by marketing departments we need from our digital SLRs, right?
Mm-hmm.
You shoot on a 50 or 100 megapixel medium format digital camera, you can crop a really tiny part and still print pretty well if you were doing editorial work in a magazine. The sharpness at some point will create diminishing returns, and you'll just be dealing with large file sizes. So, but at some point, if you're talking 8 megapixel, or you're cropping in and you've now got a 4 or 5 megapixel smartphone image, printing suddenly becomes difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can find a lab or a service that you can output to film, suddenly now that film can be scanned at a high resolution, and it has film grain that makes the pixels disappear, or you can print in the darkroom and print an enlargement. And those two things, being able to go into from digital to analog, back to digital, or back to some sort of analog process, open up tons of options. And it's this thing that is forgotten technology, right? And I'm always looking basically for ways that newer technology and older technology can work together to make something new and independent. And even not older technology, right? We as humans are analog. So this whole thing about everything being digital, it's like, no, it's not. All our output is digital. Our workflows are very digital. When I shoot film, usually everything goes to my lab, and then the lab scans things. And from that point on, I'm in a digital workflow. So I really view everything as being hybrid. I've been designing print for 30 years, over 30 years. Well, no, I guess 28 years. Yeah, I was 16 when I started designing. I've got to get my math right. But I've been designing things for print on computers for that long. It's all hybrid. The output was analog, the process was analog, but the starting point was digital.
Mm-hmm.
So getting rid of this versus mentality actually helps, I think. So me doing darkroom work and printing is actually just helping me understand light better, and understanding what kind of output I want and what is possible, not just from film, but from other methods. Like my prints in the darkroom yesterday, there's something about the texture of a photographic paper that you could print to on digital if you have the right equipment, or you can print digital to that, right? And then scan it in, which is all I'm doing with my film negs. I'm printing the 8x10, getting the images close, scanning them on a flatbed, making further adjustments in Lightroom and Photoshop to then display digitally. It's just all wonderful. And I guess there isn't a really specific story there, other than the more we accept everything as a potential tool for ourselves, and that we can learn a lot about one process by learning about another process, the better we'll be suited to take advantage of unexpected things that come our way. It opens our brain, and the more open we are, the more discovery potential we have. And for photographers, that's the thing, right? That's training our eyes to be open. If you've got your blinders on, you won't see anything. And that's, everyone who's a photographer has experienced this. When we're standing somewhere, we've seen something interesting on the side of a building or something, and we're pointing our camera at it, and people who are walking by are staring at us and kind of looking to try and see what it is that we've seen, right? Most people in the world go through life with blinders on. The minute that you connect with a camera, it literally is like removing this shield from your experience of the world, and that, whatever happens after that doesn't matter. As long as you've had that connection, the world becomes a completely different place and much more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of I've had that eureka moment with trainees on courses where it's a multi-day course and we've done composition elements and they've done some practice. The next day when they come into the classroom, it's usually like I did that train journey 7,000 times over the last decade. Today I did it and I saw so much that I never noticed before. And it's like you say, it's just switching on a part of your brain. Or to steal Brendan's expression, as he's not here, what does he say? Andy, help me on this one. I think it's learning what to see and how to see it. I think that's Andy's or Brendan's catchphrase, something to that effect. Remember hearing?
Yeah, it's something similar to that. He talks about in the workshop he did at MojoCon a couple of months ago. Yeah. But also the other thing was that what Dan was saying about once you start looking through the camera, it opens up your eyes. Brendan did an exercise in that workshop where people had to go around in the room and start taking pictures of things, and it forced you to start looking at the reflections in the photograph or the lights on the ceiling, the way they reflected in the glass, and the amount of photographs and pictures that you could take just in one room was staggering. Really was.
Great exercise. Yeah, great exercise.
And these are exercises that designers go through all the time, but also like writers, right? The more you write, the more you understand all the jumble of what's in your head. And even if you don't publish it, it's why journaling is recommended so much, for just getting ideas and thoughts out. But if you write, it helps you see better, because it helps you think and understand what's in here better, which helps you process what you see differently. If you draw, it helps. If you one of the common questions that I get when I'm teaching introduction to photography courses, regardless of what the tool is, people invariably, one or two people at the end will ask me if there are any books that they can go and read on like things like composition, and I tell them to look at books about painting and illustration, because it's the rules of composition are way older than photography, and I think that if you look at something that's teaching you something that specific across the length of a book on photography, it's going to be too specific to photography. And if you look at something about painting or about illustration, it'll get your brain out of the photography only mode and just get you thinking about putting things in rectangles nicely. But everyone is, whenever I say that to people, there's this really confused look initially, and I have to follow up with that explanation, and then they kind of go, oh, okay, yes, you need to disassociate a little bit, because composition is not something that is just for photography. It's just training your brain. And I think the more we can find sources of inspiration and training for the way we see that are outside of the thing that we want to apply those skills to, the better our training will be. And there are parallels to sports training, right? There's a lot of work that people who do all sorts of sports will do in the gym, but their sport isn't in the gym. But you're training muscles and muscle groups to respond in a certain way and to be stronger in a certain way, so that when you then go out on the field, they work the way that you want them to. But then you have to do other training to actually implement the strength that you've added and the flexibility that you've added. But those things always go hand in hand. And with creativity, we don't talk about that enough, that we have to train our brains in other ways to be as broad as possible, to fully understand things. And I think photographers, especially street photographers, that's something that's a really, really important skill. The more you understand the world, the more you understand the pace and the rhythm of people and humans and a place and a city. It's all about observation. It has very little to do with photography. Photography is actually how you capture the thing, but how you understand it, how you see it, how you anticipate, how you process all of those moving pieces. has absolutely nothing to do with photography. If you were a writer and you were trying to build an understanding of how to describe the hustle and bustle of a particular street corner, you'd have to observe in the same way. You'd have to look very deeply. You'd have to see the rhythm and the pattern and the clothing that people are wearing and the decisions they're making and who's on the phone and who's dragging their child down the stairs to the subway. And you'd have to see all those same things in order to then come up with the story and how do I distill that in words? And that distillation process is what we do with a rectangle and a camera. It's very much, I think, something that the output comes later. And the more you start to think about it in that way, you go, oh, but if I were a painter, I'd still have to think the same way. If I were a writer, I'd still have to think the same way. If I was a filmmaker, I'd still have to think the same way. I'd have to observe in the same way. The skills of how you then capture it and render it are what becomes specific. But everything before that is about what's concept in here. Yeah. So, yeah, I wanted to, this is a good time to kind of look at a couple of things because so this is a picture. I've got a couple of things to show everyone here, but I've used a smartphone to shoot kind of everything: portraits, landscapes, even this opportunity I got to shoot the red carpet a bunch of years ago. Anyone in the UK will recognize Graham Norton there. There were a bunch of other, Tom Jones was there as well, and a whole bunch of celebrities for this this opening in London. And it was just this weird thing that happened where I got the opportunity to attend this opening, the Savoy, but also shoot the red carpet if I wanted to. And I was like, of course I'm going to shoot the red carpet. I've never shot the red carpet before. Let's see how that works with a smartphone. And you can see, like, it's just basically there's a sea of reporters and cameramen and photographers in front of you, and it is just a fight. Everyone's elbowing, and it's all the stories that you hear about it are true. And I didn't have to be involved in any of that because, as you can probably guess from this angle, I was just standing behind, holding my iPhone up above me, like just kind of snapping in a little blind in a way, and using burst mode a bunch, and then doing some edits that ended up like not looking like smartphone pictures essentially. And I got this wonderful collection from this red carpet shoot because I was shooting the same way as I would have shot with any camera. I was trying to capture what was happening and the activity and the action and the story, and using the tool that I had in a way that I couldn't have if it was bigger or heavier. And so that's a great example of the tool being better for a specific purpose in that moment, but only being able to understand that because I wasn't shooting it like a smartphone. I was shooting it like a lightweight camera that I could hold over my head, right? But equally, like I've shot portraits. I love shooting portraits on smartphones because it's so, there's nothing intimidating about a phone. So you can walk up to a stranger and ask to take their picture, and it's just with your phone, and they don't take it seriously. So they stay pretty relaxed. You point a big digital camera or film camera at them, and 9 times out of 10, unless that camera is a Polaroid or something other interesting and vintage, where they're interested in the camera, they're intimidated because it's this big black rectangle with a lens and whatever, and they're scared. So and because of that, knowing that, you can use that to your advantage and get people to let down their guard and keep shooting with this phone that you're just kind of holding close to you, and get people in a very, very natural state. And what's funny too for me is that I shot more portraits early on, especially of strangers, with a smartphone because it was less intimidating to me too. And I got so much training of how to be and how to interact with people that then I could fold into my bigger cameras. Because again, it's not the tool, but the tool can have a major effect on us. Mm-hmm. So that relationship and understanding that and playing with it is really important. Even landscapes, I always have my phone with me. So even if I've got this shot in Iceland, I shot this view on the south east coast of Iceland. I shot this on everything I had with me: film, digital. I had 7 cameras on this trip. But I also shot it on the iPhone because it can render this. And this was an iPhone 5S again, with a good edit and a good understanding of light. And this is another thing that I get asked a lot. I still am on, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I'm still on an iPhone 8 Plus. I got to the point where, after having a new device, Android and iPhone, pretty much side by side, year after year after year after year, partially because of professional curiosity, but also because I wanted one, right? I got to the point where I was becoming less and less excited about the next thing, because the delta of how much better it was getting to what I could get out of it was narrowing. And I reached the point where when the iPhone 10 came out, I was not really a fan of the Face ID and the lack of a button, and also there was a bit of timing involved where I was traveling in Australia and New Zealand for 2 months and wouldn't have been able to get the iPhone 10. So if I wanted a new phone, I had to choose the 8 Plus. And then I became kind of a stubborn old man in a little way. And I said, you know what? When the next one came out, I was like, I'll stick with what I have. It's fine. And then I continued to do that. And we're now nearly 5 years on. And I still get people asking me when I share a photo that I've shot and edited on my 8 Plus, people will ask me if it's shot with the 13 Pro Max, which is a great reminder that the tool is not the most important thing. The understanding of what you can do with it is, and especially with photography, the understanding of light is everything. If you know the dynamic range of the sensor you're using, you can make magic, because what that means is that you don't take a picture if the light is not right for that camera. And that's the same with film. If you were shooting slide film, you've got a really narrow dynamic range and you can't like shoot high contrast scenes very well. So you don't. You know, or you change the way that you shoot to accommodate for that. If you're shooting black and white only on film, there's certain stuff that won't render. So there's no difference between old technology and new technology in that either. You have to understand the light, you have to understand what you want out of it, and then you can manipulate and play. And this is another thing that the smartphone taught me, actually, because of having to squeeze everything I could out of this tiny little sensor and not wanting images. Even early on, it was one of the challenges to myself. I wanted people to ask me what I used to shoot the picture. I wanted people to assume that it wasn't on a smartphone, that it was on, you know, some high-res, high dynamic range Sony mirrorless camera. And whenever that would happen, I would smile internally and just say, you know, yep, I ticked that box. I nailed that, because no one knows what I shot it with, and their assumption is that in order for it to look that good, it must have been with something really, really good as a camera. So if you want, we can talk about some stories about pictures. I know people like it sucks to talk about photography rather than show photography, right? Like it's
you have to see it, don't you? Yeah.
And actually, this picture that's up here to introduce this little section. This is shot on I was shooting behind the scenes and assisting a friend of mine who's a photographer and a director in London, and he was shooting on a set. This is in a studio. And his lighting assistant is a cinematographer and like created this wonderful like atmosphere and volume, and you could take a picture in here on anything and it will look good because the light is great, the colors are great, and even a smartphone can shoot a backlit scene when there's atmosphere to diffuse the light. Cinematography, you can learn a lot from cinematographers about light, by the way. So here's travel is a big theme for me, and I'm so glad to be able to get back into it over the last year, and I hope to continue. But one of the themes for me is that no matter what I've been shooting on, no matter where I've been, a smartphone has always been part of it. So this is obviously the Taj Mahal. This is shot from Agra, from the other side of the river, one early morning on a project in India, where I had about 72 hours in the country, and I desperately wanted to shoot Taj Mahal. I didn't go to it. I shot from this place that tourists don't normally. This is again on a for everyone who thinks they need the newest and greatest. This is on an iPhone 5S. This whole trip was an iPhone 5S. Even things like this, these shots, they've all had some post-production to them, but that lens flare is in the picture, right? That's all in camera. Being able to find the right moment and be able to see it for what the camera can see is such a key for me. And even using things like I was shooting, we were in the cars and I was shooting in burst mode out the window all the time to be able to capture things, because that's a thing I wouldn't do with a film camera and wouldn't do with even most big digital cameras. And being able to do street photography like that in a way was just such a fun thing. I still look back on this trip. These are from 2013 on a 5S, and they're still images that I love and connect with. And these will be some of the ones that there's a broader collection, obviously, but I'll be printing to 35mm film and then scanning and enlarging and playing with to see if I can make them feel even less like they were shot on an older smartphone. And this is kind of a pattern for me, using different apps to get different effects. This is shot on a 4S using an old app called Cortex Cam that allowed long exposures handheld and would do things like make the water a little bit more glassy. And this was an edit that I wanted to feel a little bit more like slide film. And does it feel edited? Yes, but that's not the point. It's kind of like it's not meant to be unedited. It's meant to feel like something. And this trip to Turkey, it was this same kind of thing. I shot with loads of different cameras, but I probably shot more with a smartphone than I did with anything else, because it was always in my hand and always easy to use. And these kind of early years as well, when I was doing a lot of travel work and starting to get hired for photographic commissions like this with tourism boards, I started to experiment more with the other third-party apps that I could use. So Cortex Cam, which I just mentioned, it's probably still around, but I use other things now for long exposures. I used a lot, and this is another shot on a 4S with Cortex Cam, which would also increase the resolution. So you'd go from an 8 megapixel, I think at that point it was still 8, to a 12 megapixel image, because it was doing all sorts of fancy merge, pixel merging, as well as long exposure effects. I left my tripod in the bus when we were at this amazing waterfall in Turkey, and also I didn't have an ND filter, so there's no way in the middle of the day I would have been able to shoot this on anything else that I had. But I stood there for 10 seconds and got an image that I was happy with, and it's why the smartphone remains a tool that's in my toolbox. And I'm just I don't have to necessarily talk a ton about each of these images unless you guys have any questions about them. But this is Iceland, and a smartphone able to rendering this light brilliantly. Again, back in 2014, I'm intentionally showing some older images because there's this we believe the marketing hype, and when I tell people that I'm still shooting on an 8 Plus for my main phone and phone camera, everyone is shocked because they assume that I would be up to date, but they also assume that I couldn't get something good enough with it because aren't the newer phones better? And I would still happily shoot with a 5S or a 4S because they can give me images like this, because the main tool is me and my eye and understanding the light. But honestly, I mean, if you can capture these ethereal images, you have to be in a landscape that gives it to you. But the devices are capable of it in a brilliant way. I play a lot with long exposures because it's something that smartphones can do in a way that no other camera can do, because the apps themselves are actually merging exposures in real time almost to get this effect, which if you're shooting this on and you're doing it handheld, because all the stabilizers are allowing you to just kind of hold pretty steady and then still generate a sharp image. And I find it's just something I kind of pull out on a regular basis. It's just, oh, yep, I don't have a tripod, or I don't have an ND filter. I'd like this effect. The phone does it always. But even things like that people assume phones are bad at, like low light or high contrast. Older devices. This is from these images from New York, or from a Skillshare course I filmed back in 2015. So again, images that for me still hold up. The lessons in the class still hold up because I didn't teach it to be specific to what tech was out then. I taught it to be about how to think, how to see, and how to expose for what device you happen to have in your hands. And when you do that, it doesn't matter what camera you have. When you do that, you're training your brain. And when you happen to upgrade your camera, or not even upgrade, switch to something else that you want to play around with, you're still banking all of that skill and those experiences, and so they're all transferable. And it means that you now have a tool that you don't have to think about, that you can just use when the moment strikes you. I mentioned my trip to Qatar. Like, this experience was amazing. The whole trip was amazing. Most of the time, I had seconds to capture something. And the phone was most of the time like what I pulled out because that was the digital I had with me. The project itself was shooting all on Polaroids, so I was shooting on instant film with for this entire project, except for the phone. And I was able to capture things. I mean, this is still one of my favorite captures, right? This
mine.
One, and whenever I look at it, this is one of those things I could not have captured in the same way in that moment without having burst mode on the smartphone I had, which was a 6 or a 6S, I think, at that point. But it doesn't matter, right? Because what it was shooting with burst. I didn't have burst mode on any of the Polaroid cameras that I was shooting. that was just it. Of the choices in front of me, and I did shoot this horse was sent running in front of this tree back and forth. I got some pictures on Polaroids, but this picture with the dust being kicked up was my favorite of the entire set. And it's actually a great example of what I was talking about with the experiments I'm in the process of doing, printing digital to film to then go back into high-res digital scans. This was cropped. The original image is vertical, and this is pretty much full width of the vertical shot, but I've lost a lot of resolution. And you can see it if you print it. You can see it especially in the tree and all those little twigs. And you zoom in, you don't have to zoom in much for it to start to feel like pixels. At this distance, you don't, and it feels fine. But what's great about, I'm just gonna say this one more time about the magic of printing digital to analog to be able to do different things with it. Think about the size of a 35 millimeter film negative, right? You can enlarge that to 16 by 20, 20 by 30 easily in a darkroom, or drum scan it and get a 300 megapixel image if you wanted to. But if you were printing a smartphone image onto a piece of paper this small, well, you'll never see the pixels. It's up like a postage stamp. That's the trick, that you can have a low res image that printing to a normal viewable size would be horrible, but you're printing it to film, you're actually doing a massive reduction, but you're massively reducing it to a medium that has, because it's organic, has almost infinite resolution. And so I'd really recommend anyone, even if it's just for your own experimentation, if you have older smartphone images that you love, that you wish you could print or have more of an archival copy of, like look around, do some Google searches, see what's available in your country or your region, because there aren't many of them available, but these film printers do exist. And there's something amazing about them. Even I think I'll probably start printing my digital archives, not the full archives, but my favorite selects from each year. I'm just gonna print them to film just for the archival purposes, including all my favorite smartphone pictures. I don't want to leave Android out because I am an iPhone fan and I shoot it, but I also have a P20 Pro, which is also kind of 3-4 years old now. But this is my US phone and I always travel with it, and it does things that the iPhones don't. These low light images that I captured a couple of years ago in London are just they're stunning to me because I know how I captured them, but they're still like that shot on the left, especially. I just adore, and the fact that a smartphone was capable of rendering in low light like that in 2018 was magical at the time, and it's still kind of magical. And again, playing around with, I don't do a lot of low light photography, but because I suddenly had this device in my hand that could do better at the time than the iPhone could do, I played with it, and I was like, again, I had to know what I could squeeze out of it. So I know we're now at we're at an hour now. Should we dive into some of the apps and tools that I like using?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's do it.
So the first one is a bit of a cheat because of what I've already mentioned. The best tool in our arsenal is us. But I want to show these because this series of portraits. Now everyone knows about portrait mode, that every device kind of has a portrait mode now, and the iPhone 7 Plus was the first device that really kind of pushed that on the iPhone side. And when it launched, I was lucky enough to be at the launch. I had early access to a 7 Plus, and it was a highlight of my experience getting to actually go out to San Francisco and kind of be at the Apple event. But portrait mode didn't work yet. Some people might remember that it took, you know, a month maybe or 2 months for portrait mode to be released as a software update. They talked about it a lot, but you couldn't use it. But I wanted to, you still had 2 lenses, and I wanted to take advantage of that telephoto lens to get portrait mode feeling images. So what I did was I got a few friends to bring in a few other friends and put them in front of a ring light. And I just shot with the telephoto lens through a ring light. This is the exact setup you can see on the right there. Is that it was just against a white wall. It's a cheap little ring light. It was not fancy at all. But being able to shoot through it and just use the light both as a ring light, but also kind of to shape the subjects. I'll go back. If I can go back, let's see if I can get back here. Just look at these portraits. They have very subtle edits to them, but my intent was to, even with the black and white ones, was to make them feel like they weren't shot on a smartphone again, and make the most of the light and the subjects themselves. And I put these out, and people kept asking, "Oh, you got early access to portrait mode?" It's like, no, I just used light, and I told people how to sit in it. And I know I shot 4x5 film of these people as well, and they came out just as well, because the tool didn't matter, the light mattered. And I wrote up a little bit of an article about that as well, because it's still, you could do that with anything you have, and just being able to play with a little bit of light is amazing. One of the other things I like doing is playing. You'll see a theme here. I said before, I like it when people think that I used something better than a phone, better in quotes. I had to do the air quotes because, so this little, hopefully everyone can see the little animation. I'm going to let this run a little bit. This is one of my favorite apps, Focus. It's what it allows you to do is basically, it's like portrait mode on some sort of electronic steroids, because what it allows you to do, it captures even more images. Like, it does a multiple kind of burst at different focal, not focal lengths, but focus points. So it's kind of doing focus stacking in a way. And it allows you, as you can see here, it allows you to visualize that too in a really interesting way. But what it does is create a depth map for the rendering of the, you know, a fake depth of field. It creates a much more comprehensive depth map than the device can do on its own in the regular portrait mode, and then allows you to manipulate it and edit the depth map as well. So if it makes a mistake, you can tweak it and tweak the mask, but then you can adjust things like the effective depth of field. You can tap on a portion of the image, like I'm doing right here in the video, and change where the focal point is really easily. And you can also render using basically profiles of traditional camera lenses. So if you want the bokeh to look like it was shot on a 10,000 pound Leica lens, you can, which is really cool. Or an old Russian lens, or a, you know, it's really amazing because we can do that now with the computational tools we have. It allows you to play, but play to get an effect that, here's the edited picture here. And now this is from a shoot I did up in Edinburgh, but, you know, again, shot on an 8+ with Focus, with a little bit of a grade put on top of it. And I shot this on this lovely model, Katie. I shot on film the whole day as well, but this image stands up to everything that I shot on my film camera as well. And I use this a lot actually for portraits. So all of these portraits, or even street stuff. So these are all shot with Focus. And I tweak the depth of field because I know what it would feel like on a bigger camera. And it allows me to play around with both the way that the in focus and out of focus areas are rendered. Tweak the mask if it got the mask wrong, because that usually throws us out of just embracing the image when we see, you know, we've all seen those errors in the default portrait mode where it just kind of messes up on the hair a little bit or something like that. I'll always tweak those things, and then I'll do a grade that you know, makes the image just kind of feel a little bit tighter. And even when it's not a straight up portrait like that one on the right, that's just on a train in Sri Lanka, but Focus is very fast. You can shoot running children with it and still get this kind of effect, which is magical. You can also shoot things that aren't people, right? So all of these were also shot with Focus. And these are the kind of images that people see, like that one on the right. It's a bunch of Leicas, right? I was doing a shoot for Leica. So that's why there were so many cameras. They're not all mine. There's just this weird mixture of digital and film pictures. But because I was doing a shoot for Leica, and I then shared this picture, just everyone assumed that it was shot on a Leica, but it wasn't. It was shot on an 8+ with Focus, and then just tweaked and edited appropriately. But for me, it's the play, right? It's important to know what the tool can do so that when I need it to do something, I can do that. But if it's not fun to figure out what it can do, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to poke all the holes. I'm not going to stretch into the corners. And Focus is just one of those tools that I still have fun with. And I've been shooting with this app for probably 4 years at this point, and it's just brilliant. So we can kind of back out of these, because I wanted to dump a lot of this stuff. There are apps that I can talk about for workflow and things. I don't know if you want to fire some questions at me. I've been talking an awful lot, which I do really well.
Yeah, you're like the best guest ever. It's like my job's so easy. There are tons. I mean, I'm bringing some up on screen. I'm watching the
We have
comments.
some questions too. Yeah, exactly.
There's loads of questions and comments and stuff going on. I'm going to do this very quickly because I went to the problem or the hassle of doing this. I'm just giving it a quick glance. Do you want to name check them?
Lovely. Oh, yes. So some of the apps that I use to shoot and edit my workflow. Halide, it's on the top left. Some of these are iOS only. My apologies to Android folks, but there are some comparisons, and then some of these are both platforms. Halide is an amazing camera app for iOS that allows you to have much more fine-grained control over your exposure and other settings if you want. See things like a live histogram, shoot in RAW, but it also allows you to directly access multiple lenses, which the default iOS camera app doesn't. It's always showing you a bit of a merged, combined image. Even when you're on telephoto or wide angle, it's kind of doing all sorts of computational things. You're not getting the pure image from that lens and sensor. So that's one thing I love using, and it can output JPEG and HEIC as well, and I feel like its rendering pipeline is better than Apple's. Just the images it creates end up looking slightly better. But you have things like focus peaking and an amazing machine learning driven macro mode, and all sorts of wonderful things in that app. And they win all sorts of awards, and it's a lovely small team. So I like using it. The next one over there is Focus. I'm going from top left across. Then Darkroom, which is one of my absolute favorite post-production apps on iOS. It just does. They recently introduced masks, and their implementation of masks. So linear masks, radial masks, color masks, luminance masks, all sorts of interesting things, and some smart masks for masking subject, foreground, background. It's, I think, my favorite implementation of masks on any app, desktop or mobile. They've just done it in such a friendly way, and it's so easy to understand. And you can save your own presets and create your own kind of looks really easily. It has color channels, it has curves. It does a really marvelous job, and it mostly replaces the default iOS Photos app for me, because it's also super fast. You don't need to open images into it. You just open the app, and there's your camera roll, which is genius for workflow. The one on the far right, top right, is RNI Images. I do a lot of my post-production, my finishing through it, because I just love the way that it renders. So I might do a lot of tweaks and masking in Darkroom, but then I'll save an image, then open it in RNI Images, because it basically does film emulation, but it does it really, really well. And I like how it applies a little bit of grain, and I like how it manages curves and colors. And then across the bottom, Lightroom is probably familiar to everyone. It is a fantastic mobile app, and I think they've done a great job with it. I don't use it for shooting, but you can use it as an all-in-one thing, where you can use it for capture, raw capture, post-processing. I sync all my film photos with Lightroom Mobile, so I can edit those on the go, which is kind of a magical thing to be able to have my film images on my mobile device and edit them in Lightroom. But it's a wonderful app. Snapseed has been a fantastic workflow app for all sorts of reasons for years, and it might not be the fastest thing anymore. I have my issues with it as a designer, but there are things that it does, like perspective shifts and some of the really fine-grained detail tweaks that you can make to an image that nothing else does as well. Next up there is Vsco Visco, which I don't use as much as I used to, but I still recommend it, because it is a fairly simple and easy to understand app, and as a platform, for people to publish to. They don't have likes or follower counts or anything like that. They've always tried to make a safe space for people. So even though I might not use it a ton, I really, really appreciate what Vsco is and has always been about. And you can still get some amazing like image edits out of it. And the last one, the bottom right there, has been one of my favorite one-hit wonder tools since it first came out, or at least since I discovered it. It's called Touch Retouch. And the bottom row exists on Android and iOS, by the way. The Touch Retouch is just basically a clone stamp or content aware fill or just little like quick heal tool. And that's all it does, but it does it brilliantly. It does it better than Lightroom or Photoshop for me. It's just, I rave about it all the time, and I love demoing it because you just kind of tap on something you don't want there, or like mask out, and it's just gone.
Okay, brilliant for those. What we might do is try and share some of the links in the description on YouTube afterwards for anyone's interested in downloading those. I didn't get to put the names under them, so my bad on that one, but we will follow up on it. I'm just scrolling because there's been a lot of commentary.
Tons of comments. Wow.
Yeah,
and I know we wanted to talk about platforms too, so maybe some of that will lead in from some of the comments. I don't know.
Yes, we kind of two talking points left. One is I'd still want to touch on a couple of the aspects of Instagram, because it's like an ever-moving target. And even just before we came on air today, I saw a tweet basically from Sue Newhook in Canada, talking about a new feature that she just discovered that was published on The Verge like an hour ago, which we'll talk to. But also, Brendan has joined us. Bless him. I don't know what time of night or day or whatever it is there. I put up a few little messages from him, but he has a couple of questions just to throw into the mix as well. So I'm scrolling way back to the start of the show, and the first one that comes in is this one, if you can see it. Question for Dan. Having been commissioned for very high-profile companies, what 2 tips would you give to ensure that you can complete the job to the client's satisfaction?
So first of all, thank you to everyone. I'm just seeing all of these comments now, and it's amazing. Thank you for everyone for being here and showing up. 2 tips. Well, I'm very lucky that I ran a creative agency for nearly 20 years before I started doing photographic commissions, because that taught me about dealing with clients. And not dealing with, that's kind of positioning it in the wrong way. It's basically all about communication, right? So first tip is communicate constantly and clearly and well. In order to do a successful creative project, full stop, whatever you're doing, you need to fully understand what the client needs and wants, because those are usually slightly different things. And you need to then be able to explain to them how you're going to get them there and what you need in order to get them what they want, not just budget, but time and process. The more they understand what you're doing, because they don't, otherwise they would do it themselves, the more they understand your process and the more you can teach them as you go, the better that process will go. You set their expectations correctly, and they're not going to be disappointed at the end, right? Equally, you set their expectations incorrectly, and it will almost certainly lead to disappointment. So as much as possible, just front load the communication, whether that's things like mood boards or just really understanding the brief. If you get a brief from a client and you don't think it's complete enough, challenge them on it, ask them questions. Don't wait until it's too late and you've already shot something. And really that's it. Like, don't promise something you can't deliver. Be very clear on what and when you're going to deliver things. And as much of that communication gets done early on, the happier you'll be.
Very good. Now, there's 2 questions that I would say are reasonably similar. I'm going to pop them up kind of almost consecutively. Would you be able to elaborate a little bit more on the reference of printing digital on film and then back again? And that's punctuated with, does it reduce noise? You did kind of explain it, but I guess a little more detail required. Same here from Becky, mentioning printing earlier. What do you suggest is the largest print size for an iPhone XS?
Okay, so these are 2 different print-related questions. They're all output, but going in different directions. So printing anything digital to film, it does reduce noise, but let's remember that noise is 2 different things. Noise on film is not noise, it's grain. But grain is an organic thing, so it doesn't have any pattern to it, which is why it usually looks very pleasant to us. Digital noise sometimes has a pattern, and it's why it doesn't always look as pleasant to us. So when you're dealing with lower resolution images, there's a combination of the digital noise from the sensor, but also, especially with smartphones, there's some manipulation going on that creates, and there's usually something like JPEG compression, as if you're shooting JPEG, so you get little blotchy types of noise sometimes as well. So you've got color noise, like chroma noise and luminance noise in digital, and then compression noise and artifacts. All of those go away when you print to a film as a medium. Because part of that is because of the reduction, and when you reduce things, it helps. Enlarging things makes things more obvious. Reducing things does the opposite. But then what you're doing is actually just mapping all of the color information to film, which is a physical medium, and so it'll take on some of the qualities of the film very slightly, but that's something that's pretty easy to understand through a few tests, and you can go, okay, well, that film stock that I'm printing to is adding a little bit more contrast. Let me reduce the contrast in the digital image before I print it, because then that'll balance it out. So it's very easy to adapt to. And then what you've got is just film, which can be enlarged and printed in the darkroom again, or scanned at a very high resolution. And then you don't have noise anymore. You don't have digital noise. Then you just have film grain and smooth gradients. And yeah, it's one of those things you have to see to understand fully, but it just works. It's this wonderful thing that just happens. It's the same as so to the second question about printing in general, printing from, I think that was an XS, an iPhone XS.
Yep.
12 megapixel is a decent size, right? And I think Becky's also saying, yeah, for those who use no apps for shooting or processing, so you're just kind of, well, first of all, unless you're cropping the image, your pixel resolution is the same. So whether you're doing post-production or shooting in a custom, third-party app or the default app, the resolution of that image will be the same as long as you haven't made it smaller, right? So, and resolution is all that matters really for printing, because it's about scale. There are calculators. The easiest answer is there are calculators online. If you just do a Google or DuckDuckGo search for print resolution calculator, you'll find something where you can just input the pixel resolutions of your image, which you can see really easily on a smartphone by just viewing the info of that. You can find the dimensions, right? You can swipe up on an iPhone, and then there's usually something to tap on an Android. Mm-hmm. And then you just type in the image resolution, or the pixel resolution of the width and height, and the resolution you want to print at. So if you're printing on an inkjet, it'll probably be 300 dpi. If you're sending it to an outside printer, print service, they'll be able to tell you what resolution they're printing at. And you can just very easily see what is the maximum size using one of those calculators that I can print it. That's not really a smartphone related trick. That's just, if you have an image, it could be a film scan, it could be a digital file from an 8 megapixel DSLR from 20 years ago. You just have to understand what the math is, and it's just down to math.
Okay, very good. Now, Brendan has commentary and everything in there, but his fundamental question brings us right back to the competition, which is, what advice would you give to someone entering the competition? Now, that in some ways, it kind of it's a precursor to what we plan to do, because Andy has gone through a selection of some of the entries that came in this week and kind of just put them aside. And we were originally going to he and I were going to discuss it, but I kind of said, well, it might be good to bring Dan in as he's a judge just for commentary. Now, can I just say, this is really, really important, because when we did this last year, there was a small little bit of blowback on social. People going, oh, because you chose that one and said, that's great, that's going to be a winner, isn't it? That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to give you some idea of the kind of thought process of the things that we are looking at and what we identify as potentially, good practice, bad practice. I'll tell you what bad practice is without swear words: sending pictures of your genitals. Not good practice. And I'm just going to throw it out there. Sorry, I don't want to offend anyone, but people have done this. Why spend money to send us pictures of your John? I really don't get it, but it happens. Anyway, all that aside, pushing back to the good stuff. We have some images to show. Let me see if I can get these up on screen. And this hopefully will give us a chance to talk a little bit about, let's go into the window, just go in here, about...
Well, yeah, I can talk to Brendan's question as we look at some of these.
Yeah.
Because just broadly, I mean, deciding what to enter, curation is its own skill set, right? And many of us aren't good or comfortable with looking at our own images and deciding between them, whether it's because we can't see them objectively, or they're all our favorites, or we hate them all until we've looked at them for long enough, right? There are just so many problems with us, the photographer, looking at our own images and trying to decide what's the best. But what I'd say is that just like when you're deciding to publish something, if you're publishing something to social media, or you're picking from a bunch of images that you want to get prints of, or you want to send to your group chat, it's essentially the same process. Like, if it's good enough to go outside of just your purview, that's your starting point. If you then have to cull down from there, that can be difficult, but like let's look at I'm not going to judge. I'm going to be very careful to keep my objectivity when looking at any of these things. But I just know I can speak to my own process when I'm looking at images. I take my time. And so I would say this, don't wait until the last minute. And I know a lot of people do wait until the last minute to enter, but if you're waiting until the last minute to enter, that's fine, as long as you're starting your review process and your curation process now. Give yourself time. Print things out if you can. If you just have a home printer, even if it's black and white and the images are in color, just print a whole, like a couple on a page and cut them out and put them on a wall so you're looking at them in a different context. Again, we learned so much by just changing our context, and that is the same for curation. When I put photo books together, both my own and other people's, I print everything, and I love printing in low res, crappy black and white, because I'm no longer looking at the details. I'm looking at the overall thing. I'm looking at the composition. I'm looking at the contrast. Like, does this image still feel good when it's crappy in its output medium, right? And if yes, then there's something strong there. If no, toss it.
And you have to be, don't you, as well? I mean, when you're choosing images to submit, like, I think there's a thought process. I found it, not that I've entered many competitions, I won't be blunt, but what I do is I have an iteration process where things go into a kind of a favorites folder, and then I'll leave it for a day or two and come back and look at my favorites and decide what moves forward from that step. And I think that iterative process has value, definitely, because looking at it with fresh eyes, so to speak, I think can be very, very helpful. You can get too locked into just looking at the same image for too long. Exactly. Well, will we have I completely appreciate, sorry to put you on the spot, Dan. I know we didn't flag this in advance, we were going to do this, so apologies in advance, but you're welcome to stay stum and just have Andy and me speak if you wish. But nonetheless, there are, I think, 5 or 6 images in the different categories.
Let's look at them.
Definitely worth a quick look. So this particular one, Andy, do you want to give us a bit of the backstory on this one?
Yeah, well, the images I've just pulled out here, I've gone through those that have been submitted so far, and these are just a selection of those that piqued my interest. This one in particular, I like the layers. It's in the landscape and nature category, and I love the layers within it. You've got the leading line of the wall. That takes you down to the tree, and the rainbow in the background just beautifully sort of frames that tree. I just think the components of it just work well together.
Yeah, I have to say, from my perspective, like, the immediate thing, I get the leading line bringing us to the tree and everything, but the rainbow is the thing that completely smacks me straight in the face. It's like such a beautiful and kind of spontaneous capture, and yet it still has all the compositional elements in there that makes it really, really interesting. But yeah, I think it's a beautiful image. I know that Mobile Creator is in the stream because we've had a number of comments from him, I believe, earlier on. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there's a couple of comments in there, so he's definitely in the stream. So yes, beautiful image. Dan, I don't know if you want to weigh in or not. You're up to you.
I'm going to say neutral. I have to judge all these later. So.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. No hassle. Right, let's look at the next one.
Yeah, again, this one, Andy. I really love the people that can capture these sort of jellyfish, and there's just something so artistic about them. I've tried in the past to sort of capture these if we've been to the zoo or aquarium, to capture something like this. I think at the time I was using an iPhone 5, and generally it's in low light conditions. I've never been able to sort of get the clarity, but there was something about this image and the way that the jellyfish is sort of forms that just really nice sort of abstract shot, really captured.
I guess a jellyfish genitals are okay.
Well, are you going to walk us through it and tell us which bits are which? No. Okay. No. Moving swiftly on. There you go. Another category: travel and sense of place.
Yeah. This one here, it was the framing, the silhouette of the person just well in the way, the time on the phone, the framing of the window, and then you've just got the building opposite and the signage. It was just a nice little sort of observational moment.
Yeah, I love that shot as well. It's like, these are one of those ones that go back to some of the conversations with last year when we were talking to, oh God Almighty, his name has forgotten me, Lawrence, when we were talking about that idea of, the setups and just having the patience to wait for the moment to reveal itself. Like, it's a beautiful example of that. Great. What about that one?
This one here, I just like the simplicity of it and the diagonal composition, the way the shadows just cut the image in half. Just high contrast. It's simple composition, simple photo.
Yeah, love the really, really high shooting angle, though. That's what kind of sets it apart, doesn't it? It's completely different perspective. And then this one, abstract.
Yeah, it was just there was a few. There seems to be a series of these, but you know, this one was just one of the examples. It was just, I don't know whether it's layering of different textures, double exposures, and again, just it's the frame border to the image. It just gives it a sort of old school analog type of feel.
Yeah, I love the way that
I
the fractals
just thought it was
neatly dry
interesting.
across it. Yeah, it's beautiful actually. Yeah, the textures are definitely the really, really striking part of it. Stunning. And I think there's possibly one more.
Yeah, this one again, another simple photo. The subjects in the middle, the reflections in the water, the textures in the sand, the use of negative space. It's a good example of, you know, often they say, you know, less is more. I just something that drew me out to it.
Yeah, beautiful shot as well. Again, I love the symmetry on it, and I don't know if the water line is actually sitting on the rule of thirds, but it's very bloody close to it if it isn't anyway. So yeah, beautiful spot. Very good. I don't know. I think that's possibly it. Is it? Yeah, that's all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, look, Brendan, also, there's been a side conversation, Dan. I just have to flag this with you. So Brendan and Elaine Taylor have been having this sidebar conversation on Twitter about you and the barbershop singer quintet. Is this? Yeah. Anything you want to add to that conversation to share with the folks at home?
Well, I just you know, I've spent 32 years of my life as a singer, alongside everything else, and like with everything else, it teaches you things that are broadly applicable. Yeah, there was a span of time, I think, when I met all of you, where I wasn't actively singing. I took a break because all of my performing and competing was done with groups in the US, and when I'd moved to the UK, it was just a bit too much to fly back and forth for all those things. And then 2019, I got back into it, and you know, even though the pandemic kind of interrupted all that, I've just this year I've been in the States actually for a few months because of having some work gigs and conferences, but also having a handful of performances with my quartet, and we're one of the top ranked like top 2-3 groups in the world in the competition circuit for that style of music, which, you know, that and a nickel will get you a nickel, but but it's a fantastic thing to be able to do. I sing with my brother as well, and 2 other guys, and he and I have just always, we've run our businesses together. Sometimes we've sung together and directed choruses together, and a lot of my teaching experience comes from directing a chorus and teaching music before I started teaching professionally. And I do music production sometimes now as well professionally. So there's always, again, all sorts of connections, and I can draw so many parallels between the visual arts and music and rhythm, even editing. When I edit a book or an exhibition, I'm talking about rhythm and beats and pauses and rests, and using all the musical terminology to describe how we feel and how we experience things. I think you could do that with a single image as well. So I'm not going to sing, Brendan. It's lovely to see you here, Brendan, but I'm not going to. Barbershop quartet. So there are 4, and no one wants to hear a harmony part to anything on its own. But I will say this: there's loads on YouTube. It's actually one of the things that various forms of social media have done a great job in just spreading a cappella music in all its forms. And there are groups like Pentatonics who have now become world famous as a quintet in doing pop a cappella that everyone has heard, even if they don't realize they've heard them. And a cappella TikTok has exploded, with people like in different parts of the world singing in, you know, four panels, singing their own voice part. And was just listening to some of it last night with my family, because my nieces and nephews all can carry a tune, and all. It's just it's a family thing. So yeah, just go online and look stuff up, and you're bound to find me if you look hard enough.
Very good. You mentioned in the middle of all that, you mentioned printing. So to wrap it up, bring it full circle, because you did say during lockdown you basically turned your hand to a few other businesses. Can we for a moment talk about Notice?
Oh, sure. So the first book here out on one of the projects that I got myself into in 2020 was working with a good friend of mine, Wesley Verhova, whose name is on that book. It's his first photo book. And he and I have known each other for years, and we were both like locked down in different places. He was in Vancouver at the time. I was in Florida, and he'd produced a body of work over about a 4-month period of daily photo walks that suddenly he went, this is a book. I need to make this into a book. And so he asked me as a designer, he said, would you like to help me design this and make this into a real thing? And I, of course, said yes, because I love making physical things, and it's great working with other people's photographs. It's so much easier than working with your own. And in the process of putting this together, the conversation then extended into, well, let's form a publishing imprint for photo books to do things in a slightly different way. There are loads of indie publishers, but we had a couple of ideas, and on the business model side and on the quality of production side, to make really high quality books through essentially a pre-sale model. So it's mostly about marketing and getting the word out, and you have the people who are purchasing the book funding the whole process of producing it and printing it, which takes a huge responsibility off the artist. And most of the time it's either the artist or a publishing house that foots that bill, and that's not always that easy to get. And self-publishing is also kind of difficult. So Notice is the first book where we decided we would prove our model by publishing one of our books, essentially, to show that it works. And then the publishing imprint is New Style Publishing. It's based in Amsterdam, where Wesley is based. And Notice was the first book. We were already sold out of the first printing of 1,000, and the second printing is now going on sale and getting out to bookstores. And it's just a wonderful thing to make physical things, right? But and to collaborate with our other artists. That's another thing that's worth mentioning, because I haven't said that. Photographers are such solo, solitary creatures, all of us. And photography itself can be very solitary. Any chance you get to collaborate with other people, whether that's just banding together with other photographers to help curate your own work, because it's much easier. And that's actually a tip for entering the competition. If you have photographer friends, have them look at the things you're considering submitting, and get an outside opinion from someone who knows how to look at images. You might not agree with them, but it will really help. It's just doing critiques, and critiques in the art world are very valued for a reason. But yeah, so we're working on other book concepts and zines as well. But our thing is that we're gonna only produce things of the highest quality, and it's there's a lot more to come from New Style, and we're really excited. And the book Notice has just had so much acclaim already, and we're entering it into all sorts of photo awards now, or book awards rather. And it's fun to hold a physical, tangible object. To me, photo books are portable exhibitions, and that you can keep forever, which is just a really special thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now it's 1 hour and 40 in. I could literally just keep going for another 2 hours constant with you, but I'm not too sure everyone at home will quite feel as enthusiastic. We've had a solid
YouTube here.
Solid number the whole way through. We'll test it. How long before they kick us out? No, seriously though. I've put up a ticker on screen so you can basically see how to connect with Dan. So on Instagram, he's as per screen at Dan Rubin. I put up his website where there's a contact form and stuff, and also a link to where you can actually get the book. There's still comments and stuff coming in. Aside from Brendan desperately trying to get you to sing. I see that. Over to this part of the world. In you. But anyway,
I'll say one thing to anyone. If there are questions that we haven't had a chance to answer, just find me on Instagram and send me a direct message. Over the next couple of days, I'll just keep my eye out to see if anything comes through, and then at least I can kind of try and close the loop on some of those.
Fantastic, that's great. We're not done yet, because if people saying thanks so much for everything, don't go. We want to give some stuff away. Please stay with us for another second. Well, okay, minute or two, maybe
stay for the free stuff.
For what? So let's recap one more time at the top of the show. If you joined us late, we said that we were going to give away a voucher to the value of $199 euros. Brent or Andy, remind me, which is it? $199, is it?
Yeah, $199 worth of products. While we've been on air, I've had a message through from Reflex. That does include bundle items, I believe.
Good that they're as well. That's great. Okay, good to know. Well, so to do this, Andy has put the names of everybody who's entered in so far into some sort of a random name picker generator.
So the Wheel of Fortune.
There you go, Wheel of Fortune. And he's now live, by the way, from his computer as we watch it.
So here we go. And the winner is...
Should I play music or something? I don't know.
Well, Dan could sing. Robin Robin Mencher.
Oh, it's out. Very good. I can't see it, unfortunately. Let me see if I can get that any bigger on screen. Nope, that's full screen. Robin Mentor, congratulations, Robin. Well done. We'll reach out to you after the show to hook you up with the voucher code and everything, so you can basically jump onto the Reflex store and book whatever it is that you want to take away with you. Now, that means then in our next show, we're giving something else away, right? So which one are we going for? Our sponsors, again, are Joby, Reflex, and Cozy Speed. So it's down to now Joby or Cozy Speed. Which one do you want to go with?
I think Joby. I think you've got it's a tripod, isn't it? Yeah.
It's more than just a tripod, he says, not making any money from Joby while saying all this. But anyway, yeah, no, but this is it. They sent me two of these to give away. So I can't remember how much it's worth, but it's definitely over £100 anyway, because these are post Mojo Fest prizes. This one, it doesn't come with the GoPro or the phone, but it does come with everything else. So you get the famous GorillaPod legs and the little bendy arms and the phone mount, but you also get their new microphone and their little new, really clever little light that I looked at over at Mojo Fest. So it's a whole kit. Yep, everything's in there. Now I'm just jealous. I should have swapped it out with just the bloody tripod. No, I'm joking. So it's a really, really nice price. And if anyone is interested in getting into the whole kind of experimenting with time lapse, or maybe even starting to vlog for yourself, all of which are perfectly, useful ways to use your smartphone as well as just for photographs, because it's another way to help market what you do, then all you need to do is enter the competition. That's it.
So I suppose the thing to add, everyone that has already entered will automatically be entered into the next prize draw.
Oh, nice. So I did not know that.
Anyone that hasn't entered yet, obviously, if you want to get your hands on that, then enter into the competition. Submit your images, and your name will be chucked into the Wheel of Fortune for next time, which I think will be on our next live show, which was it the 6th of August?
Yeah.
I think it will. It'll be even like 2-3 weeks, something like that.
You know, the one in the legacy, aside from the ponytail, look at that, rocking that, man. Yeah, dude. Aside from the ponytail and the beard, which are the two major legacies of COVID, the other thing is I can't plan more than 3 days ahead. It's a really weird thing. I'm not kidding you. It's like, this is genuinely turned into a problem. I have clients around me going, that thing we booked you for? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, where you find that date as fast as possible. So I don't know. It's just a weird legacy thing. Anyway, I'm delighted that Robin is actually online with us and has just discovered that she's just won. So congratulations, Robin. That's fantastic.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
The next show, as Brendan has kindly reminded us, is with Jack Hollingsworth. And Jack was one of the keynotes over at Mojo Fest in London. And as always, great man to spend some time with as well. So looking forward to that conversation. Brendan will be chatting to him in a couple of weeks' time. So that's great to look forward to. Before we do wrap up, and I know people have noticed the numbers dropped only a tiny bit, 3 or 4. So they're sticking with us, which is amazing. I'd still love to pick Dan's brain. In fact, when we hang up, I'm still going to pick his brain on some of the new features on Instagram. I'm just not going to live stream it. But he has been generous enough to offer up his time on Instagram if people are interested in reaching out to him. Just a final couple of plugs before we do go, because it's important to remember the shows from last year, they're all sitting there on the Mobiography YouTube channel. And if you're with us today, it means you must have in some way found your way to the Mobiography page. So please do have a look at some of the other actual videos that we have. Brendan's demos, Mark Fernley's ones, the one, there's quite a few in there. Have a look at those, including the previous one that we did. That's a quick QR code. As usual, if you scan it with your phone, it'll take you straight to the channel, but maybe you're watching it on your phone, so you can't do it right now. As always, I say it every week, remember to check out the latest edition of the Mobiography magazine, because it's out about 3-4 weeks at this stage, Andy. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It'll be out beginning of August. It's
new
next edition. New edition will be out in next week. So I'm a bit different from you. Yeah, I can't plan ahead either. So
it's amazing we managed to get this thing off the ground at all. But anyway, last thing is, if you have ideas, comments, feedback, suggestions, anything, please do reach out to us. Those are all the different social channels you can connect with Andy in Mobiography through. And last but not least, I'll just pull that down and say even though Brendan is not on screen, he is with us. He's out there, in Tokyo, I think it is. And Brendan's just said, will I be left back on the team? To be decided. Now, of course you will, Brendan, if you're back with us. I think Andy might be away for the next one, are you?
Well, it's we need him back for his chiseled good looks and firm jutting chin.
He missed that comment, though. Thanks so much for all the feedback, guys. Really, really appreciate it. Lots of great comments coming in from folks and everyone. Really, really appreciate you being with us. So anyway, any final thoughts, Dan? Parting words, as they say.
Well, and I know we went on some tangents longer maybe than we intended. And I see even just one person here, Lynn saying here, you know, she's hoping for more insight to Instagram, which we were planning on talking about platforms in general. So I think maybe it's worth doing like a couple of minutes just as an overview of where things are, because I know people want to know. And I've been on Instagram now for, as I said, 12 years. It's changed. It'll always change. We have to understand that platforms will change and adapt. There's someone else's business model. We'd like it to adapt and change to our benefit and to our liking, but that's not how it works. If you want something that's exactly to your liking, you have to build it yourself, which obviously isn't practical. So we've got to always be flexible enough to enjoy things while they're working for us and not get too upset and frustrated when the market forces change, right? Everything's moving to video. There are all sorts of things shifting and changing. This is a great, this is the article that Glenn mentioned earlier, that this is brand new news this morning, that people can remix your images if your account is public into a reel, which is kind of one of their video functions that they're pushing, which is basically an answer to TikTok, right? So everything, again, market forces. They're not, just making what's best for what people want on the platform. They're adapting because they have to, right? It's the only way they can stay relevant as a platform. We have to understand that and just go, okay, maybe that's something I'll use, maybe it's something I won't, but let me be aware of it. Again, like being a street photographer, right? It's the awareness that's important. You're not taking a picture of everything you see. And with platforms, even one platform like Instagram, you won't use every feature. Every feature won't be for you, but it's worth being open enough to it to say, might I be able to use this, rather than saying, I hate this, which will lead to you not using it. And let's think back to the early days of Instagram when professional photographers said, Instagram's stupid. Why would you take a picture with your phone and post it as opposed to, that small and put a filter on it? It would be horrible. They figured out that was not the right approach, right? But they were closed rather than open. So I think one of those things is just to see the changes as inevitable and work as much as possible to adapt within that. And reels are actually, I think, something that I've seen a lot of photographers use really well, because you can put stills into an edit and you can edit them, into like some 10, 20-second little thing that has a little bit of music, where you're editing stills to a beat and a rhythm and giving people a very quick overview of like the feel of a particular shoot you did, or of your style, or your portraits that you shoot, or something else like that. And why not play with it? Maybe you won't like it, or maybe you will enjoy it, and maybe you'll see that other people do. Don't feel the pressure to have to. Instead, try and open yourself to wanting to. And I mean, that said, I also wanted to make sure that in that platform discussion, there aren't many that we have at our disposal. We still have Flickr. There are still people who use it. I still pay for a Flickr Pro account, just kind of because, even though I don't put anything on it in a decade or close to. But again, if we experiment, we might find something we like better. Glass is something a lot of people are using as a platform, and I actually just heard that they're about to release an update to it that allows it to actually work anywhere, so you don't even need a smartphone. You can just use it from a desktop or a laptop, which is again wonderful, because Instagram sometimes does that. But if there's something that you want to be able to like use and share, the more ways we can get at it, the better. And Glass is wonderful but it's subscription only, right? So people who are looking for something to replace Instagram, but it's free, that's not that. But again, that shouldn't be the point. Use Instagram for what it's good for. If there's something else that can sit alongside it, use two things. Use your own website. Like, people forgot how to build and use their own websites. I mean, myself included. I used to build websites, and I got tired of building websites, so I never built one for my photography. I used Instagram. I'm working on my own photographic site eventually, because now Instagram isn't serving me to the level it has, and my answer is not to complain about it. It's like, all right, well, I'll go solve the problem some other way. And so I would say that, like, if you're trying to navigate Instagram specifically, because it still is the big gorilla, or any social media, like, how do I use TikTok? Well, see if you like it. Don't feel like you have to. Don't feel like you have to do anything but continue to post photos to Instagram. If you feel like fewer people are seeing your photos because Instagram's pushing video, try making reels, or don't worry about it and try something else that you have more control over. The stressing about something that you have no control over, I mean, this has nothing to do with technology, right? That's just old-fashioned good advice.
Yeah,
it's just not worth it. But But for me, like, I love this new feature. I know a lot of people will push back because they won't like someone else being able to use their photos in something. But let's look at it this way. Why wouldn't you like someone else sharing your photos? That just gives more reach to your images. And the chances are, I haven't used this, you can turn off remixing opt-out. Thanks for zooming in on that. So that's great. They'll allow each account to not allow that kind of access. But my guess is, because it's a remix, just like on TikTok, if you remix something, it always points back to the origin point and the creator, which is a brilliant design choice. If Instagram does the same thing with this feature, I think it's actually going to help, because what it'll mean is that if you can get your images, your still images, seen by someone who wants to remix them, well, that just means more people are going to see your still images and be able to find their way back to it. And how can that be a problem? Which is the same thing I was telling people in the first few years of Instagram, when they were saying, oh, I won't go on Instagram. Like, I don't want Facebook owning my photos, or whatever their excuse was. And I said, well, now that it's grown to a certain point, that's probably where people are more likely to discover your images. Wouldn't you rather be discovered randomly than not? Mm-hmm. And the answer should always be yes. And if the answer is yes, then you have to go on Instagram. And I think let's just always see the changes in platforms as an opportunity for more of that, if we're open to it, rather than something to get upset about and frustrated about. Even though it is frustrating, the frustration doesn't help us.
I think the frustration, to be honest with you, and I mean, I'm tipping 50, and I think I'll be honest and say I just find it a challenge keeping up with all the constant changes. It's like you've just mastered, I think I figured out how to game the algorithm now. Tomorrow, oh no, that's over. Now it's Reels, and it changes so much. And that is frustrating. I get that. But flip side of it, and I'd echo what you just said, I think ask yourself, number one, what are you using the platform for? Because for me, that's probably the single defining thing. Is it to find community? Then maybe there's other platforms like Glass or 500 Pics and other places that you can go to find.
Or Twitter. Twitter is actually a great photographic community now. It's thriving, and it's still one of my favorite social networks ever. I've been on that since 2006. And Twitter for photographers has become brilliant, because there's also more conversation around it rather than just seeing things. Because it's not a photo-driven platform, it changes the way people interact with the photos. It changes how they see it. And the ability to retweet images, like tweets, right? They could be a photo tweet, and I see people's images reaching so many people. And I mean, that's, what is that worth? Who knows? Does it get you any work if that's what you're trying to do? Is it just exposure? Like, all of those things mean different things to different people, but it's a different way of getting your images in front of people. And ultimately, whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, if your purpose isn't just to look at them yourself, then the goal is to get more people to see them. So why not play around with the tools? If you don't like it, just like with a camera, if you play with Twitter and you don't enjoy it, stop using it. Mm-hmm. If you, but do play with it. You don't know if you'll love it or hate it until you give it a shot. And there's a
communities feature on Twitter that I think is the most overlooked specific feature it's done. And what they've basically done is they've done back to Facebook what Facebook has been doing to it for years, which is they took the single best feature left in Facebook, which is the community groups part, and basically put it into Twitter. And I mean, like, if it's not there already, guys, start it. Trust me, Mojo Fest would never have happened if it hadn't been for a conversation with Len Clark back in 2013. It was a case of just have the conversation and realize if there's an opportunity. So explore it.
Twitter Spaces, or maybe start a podcast that talks about something. Like, there are all sorts of ways that we can use the knowledge that we each have and the things that we're passionate about to communicate about our art. It's not just about sharing the art itself. And I know that's not for everyone, but everyone has their own thing. So figure out what that is for you, and then just play with it and see how the technology and the platforms and everything else will allow you to play with that.
I'm going to do one thing now. Is going to put Andy really out of kilter, but he might thank me later. Okay, which is one of the highlights that people kept saying back to me, and this has been true of every single one of the Mojo/something events that I've done, which is the highlight for them has been photo walks around particular places wherever we've held the event, whether that's Dublin, Galway, or most recently in London. There's a huge opportunity. Andy knows this. There's a huge opportunity for Mobiography to host in-person get-togethers. Just saying it out loud again. No pressure.
You've said this before.
No pressure, Andy.
Like, for me, the revelation for me in the mobile creator community, there's the video side of things to an extent, has been the community, how supportive they are, how willing they are to basically go out of their way to meet. I know from several of the names, Elaine being one example, that, you know, when Jack came to London, it was all about, oh god damn, I really wish I could get to London to meet up with the crew, you know, like, so like find your tribe and network with them and find out what they're doing and learn from them. Like it's all out there if you're willing to look. I think that's my punchline on it anyway. Right, 1 hour 55 and 38.9 seconds and going. This is a record. But like,
you'd almost think I was Irish.
It's in there somewhere, Dan. I can tell you for sure. Anyway, listen, on that bombshell, to steal a Clarksism, let's call it a day. It's been a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for your time, Dan. I know it's still early in the morning over there.
My pleasure. Thank you both, and to everyone who's been watching live. It's been fun. I knew it would be, but it's been great as always.
Great to see you. So
thank you.
Get over to London next. If you're in that part of the world, I'll definitely hook up with you for a bite to eat or a pint.
Definitely, we'll do that soon.
Okay, listen, thanks so much for joining us. We're back in a couple of weeks, as Andy's already mentioned, with Jack Hollingsworth. But until then, again, if you have any questions, reach out on some of the social channels, and fingers crossed, we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. We'll be giving away that Joby tripod kit, and remember to get your entries in. Don't leave it to the last minute. But that's it. Until next time, talk to you soon. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.